You are listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Proteum Machining, and this week I am happy to welcome Keaton Friedman. Welcome, Keaton.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Dylan.
My pleasure. So for those who don't know who you are and what you do, what are all the details?
Yeah, so I own a company called Swift Universal Optical Systems. We've been in business for 7 years now. We're located in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and we offer a kind of cradle-to-grave design through manufacturing service to our customers. So everything from the iterative design process, whether it's starting with a napkin sketch or a requirements document, all the way through to prototyping and eventually full-rate production.
Awesome. Well, before we get into your backstory, what kind of machinery do you guys operate?
Yeah, so we're a small shop. So we have a Haas VF2, just standard 3-axis mill, an LB3000 MYW EX2, just a standard 6-axis lathe, an Akuma MU6300, and a Kern Micro HD with an Aroa ERC80 on it.
Awesome. Yeah. For a small business, that's not normal small business attire. But let's get into your backstory and talk about how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started the business in college. Believe it or not, I was actually a history major up at Appalachian State, which is kind of in the northwest corner of North Carolina in the Appalachian Mountains. And, I started, like I think a lot of people did, being introduced to a Bridgeport in a family friend's shop, and didn't realize that it was necessarily a passion of mine at the time. But I think throughout, the rest of my high school years and through college, it was something I kept returning to in some fashion or another. I grew up, my parents had a family business, they owned an art gallery. And so I think in some ways I was kind of surrounded by design and became passionate about that, but also like taking my hands dirty and having more of the mechanical side of things. And so, to some extent or another, it kind of became the natural path. And I started designing my own products in college and eventually had this opportunity to kind of show them to somebody who would be a potential customer. And in showing them that design, they said, man, this is just an awful idea. I'd worked on this for like probably 2 or 3 years of my life. And, all through college, I was trying to design this product. And I finally, bought a 3D printer, made a prototype and showed it to him. And it was devastating. But he said, hey, if you can draw, in SolidWorks, can you do other things? And
so where did you get SolidWorks? Like, how did that, as a history major, and I know you have access to, student SDKs and stuff, but like, where did that even come from that you were like, oh yeah, let me get a CAD software and learn it?
Originally it wasn't even that. I was really fortunate. The childhood friend of mine who now actually works for us, his father had a machine shop and he took the right path and went, got into a mechanical engineering program. And so I had all these ideas. And so I would take them to him and I'd give him the napkin sketches and I would just watch him on SolidWorks and try to, understand what he was doing, and realized kind of really early on that I needed to get myself a seat and teach myself the software. So that was really the origin of it.
Okay. That makes more sense. So you printed this prototype and got your hopes dashed. Where did you go from there?
Yeah. So thankfully that person had a lot of other ideas. And so I started just kind of manifesting his creation. So he would give me his napkin sketches and I would draw them out in SolidWorks and 3D print prototypes, and he would test them. And then, eventually he said, hey, can I buy metal versions of this? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I didn't have an LLC. I didn't have anything prepared. And so I kind of frantically went off and got all of my paperwork together and sent the first drawings out to a job shop locally in Raleigh, and had all of that kind of experience of never having outsourced parts before, never having any formal training in producing drawings or anything like that. And, walking through that process of having parts made was ripe with errors. And certainly something that I realized as soon as we got the first parts back, that I needed to bring that skill set in-house somehow. I needed to have some agency over that process.
So then what were your first steps towards getting that in-house?
Yeah. So, it was getting onto YouTube and figuring out, I was going into these job shops when I was shopping around and seeing the kinds of equipment they had, and it was mostly Haas. So immediately, Haas has that transparent pricing, and went online and realized, okay, I can't afford this. And so what is the alternative option? And I, stumbling through YouTube, found people like John Saunders and John Grimsmo and saw these Tormach machines and thought, well, this isn't a price point that I can afford. And so believe it or not, the first machine that I started with, I took all of the profits from the first contract that I got and put them into a Series 3 PNC 1100 Tormach. At the time was running Mach 3 and didn't work. And that was really the beginning of it. I was really grateful to have some family friends that ran a big printing company offer me some space in their building. And so I framed out this little 16 by 16 foot shop with a buddy of mine on a weekend, on a long weekend from school, and put the machine in and framed the building up around it and had this little shop in Raleigh. And so then for the last year or so of college, I organized all my classes so that I started on Tuesday morning and I finished on Thursday night. And so Thursday night, my last class ended at 8. I drive the 3 hours home, come into the shop then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, and then leave really early on Tuesday morning to go back to school. And so for that first 6 months or so, it was just getting the machine fixed. There were a lot of controller issues and all sorts of little things that had to get repaired. And so, I remember at the time that machine felt so daunting. Because I didn't have any formal training, I didn't understand the basic concepts. And, it was really sitting down with YouTube and, watching 3 seconds, pausing it, doing exactly what they did, unpausing it. It was that process until the concept started making sense. I bought some books, but a lot of it was really just YouTube.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, I'm just thinking like timeline wise. So in 7 years, you've turned a PNC into a Kern.
Yeah, we didn't get, the first. When you say it like that, I suppose. Yeah, we didn't get the first. I got the Haws, the VF2 in May of 2019. So, the business has really been on a pretty aggressive trajectory since then. But it all comes back to the Tormach, believe it or not.
So what was growing the business like then at that point? Like when did you move out of that 16 by 16? What made you get the Haas? How did you grow a small business with a Tormach?
I think I chased down what I think everyone does at the beginning. I chased down whatever was hot at the time. And, things like, the very first part that I ever made was a fidget spinner. And then I made giant Legos and I made coasters and necklaces and just anything that somebody would pay me for. But that whole time, none of that was paying the bills. I was still living with my folks, barely on my feet. And those early connections, selling product to, larger companies and larger organizations, I started having the ability to create prototypes for them. And so they continued to come to me with ideas, and eventually that opened the door into the defense world, into supporting, Fort Bragg and the military down here. And so I think a lot of it just came down to people. It was, I was honing my manufacturing skills through making these simple parts until a point where I was presented with a really challenging part to make that was, 25 inches long on a machine that had, 15 inches of X travel. And, it had, I think it was 8 operations to complete it, and it had some really tight tolerances on it. And I realized in that moment that this was a watershed part, that I needed to just put everything I could into that part and get it done as quickly as I could. And it's that single part that really opened the door to who our customers are today, because the result of that part was the ability to buy a Haws. It was enough volume came out of it to justify that.
So, I mean, as you said, you have been on a crazy trajectory then since then. So how did that all scale? Because you've also been through a couple Akumas, right? Before you landed on the one you currently have?
Yeah. So, we got the Haws, and as soon as we started making some of these parts, we started being introduced to other problems that our customers had. And, it's kind of as soon as you get foot into the door, it really started to flow from there. And so we got introduced, again, as a small company, people aren't willing to take a big chance on you. And the government has something called SBIR, which is the Small Business Innovation Research Grants. And so it's a mechanism to give small companies in the US a phased award that allows them to develop novel product ideas that have a low likelihood of success. And so the government used that as a vehicle for us to grow. So, like I said, they're multi-phase. And so you start off with, a relatively small amount of funding to develop a white paper. And if they like the concept that you have, then they'll invest in the actual prototyping and development, the research and development, manifest it. And, that's really when the business started to change. through May of 2019, it was a one person company. It was just me. And I realized early on that we needed to hire compliance, that I needed somebody to, help support the things that I'm not good at. I'm not good at necessarily the organization and that side of the business. And so I knew that that was where I needed to start in terms of onboarding. And we rode through for the next 6 months or so with just myself and our compliance officer.
So tell me about the SBIR though. Like, how did your customer bring this to you and say, we want to help sponsor you with this? Like, how does that process work? Because I've heard of them, but I didn't know quite kind of how the whole process works.
Yeah, so they're a bit mysterious to everyone, I think, even within the government. And so, we had developed this, kind of had some success with these small runs of product for them. And in learning about some of these other problems that they had, we proposed a technical solution to one of them. And they liked our technical proposal and said, hey, can you do this for X amount of money? And, it was more money than we had made the previous year. And I said, wanted to say yes immediately. And I talked to some of my mentors and I said, look, you're never going to grow as a company with that amount of investment, ask for more. And so I asked for a lot more money and they didn't have it. And they said, well, you know what, we'll get back in touch with you. And I think it was that moment where they said, look, it's a small company. It's a little bit too much risk to put our own money in play here. And that is kind of the process where they discovered SBIR. And SBIR is really, I think we're a success story of that program, which is what are kind of in their origins really high risk endeavors. But if you find the right people, they can, build successful companies. And
Totally.
so that was totally the origin of that.
Okay. And then, so you mentioned that you had to create a white paper. Did you have advisors on that? Like, how did you come to write a white paper that was accepted through that program? Because I imagine similar like patents and things like that, there's a lot of ways to structure those correctly.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, the SBIR program, part of the reason it's successful is they give you wonderful templates because the people receiving these awards are new to this space. They don't know how to write, contracts, et cetera. And so they gave us a really powerful template to be able to use that, listed out all the things that we needed to answer. And, even for years after that, we would go back to that template to understand, what our customer was looking for.
Very cool. So you got this, you had a compliance officer. What made you think compliance officer? Like, are you like, okay, I need to get a, ERP, I need to get ITAR and all these compliances, and that's what led you to it? Because I feel like that's not many people's first hire.
I think it came down to where the majority of my time was going. So I was spending most of my time preparing these proposals, meeting all of the contractual and legal obligations of the contracts, and not actually having time to design or machine. And so it was kind of an obvious direction that I think I saw the writing on the wall, which was that, if we got a phase 2 award, we were going to need to hire a whole bunch of people. And to do that, we were going to need HR, we were going to need payroll, we were going to need 401ks and health insurance. And I didn't, looking ahead, see the ability to do that on my own without somebody who had experience in it. And, as has been the case in our business, on many occasions, we have had our most successful hires from within our social circle. And so, our first hire was somebody that I knew personally and I knew had experience and I knew could handle this. And so it just made sense.
Okay. So you hired her, you got this first round. Where did it go from there? This VF2 to what was next?
Yeah. So again, that next 6 months, kind of through the fall of that year, was really just writing this white paper. And, we were receiving good feedback from our customer. And so I realized through the fall of that year, as we were completing the white paper, that we were going to need design capacity. And I remember telling my dad, I was explaining this person that I needed. I needed a mechanical engineer. I needed somebody that knew SolidWorks. And, my dad said, well, why don't you hire, your childhood friend that helped kick this off? And I thought to myself, well, he would never work for me. And he says, well, just ask. And so it was the day after Christmas of 2019 that I invited him down to our shop and kind of showed him what I was doing and asked him if he wanted to come work for us. And I think, it was a perfect timing in both of our lives. And, he agreed to come work for us. And that was the start of the company really beginning.
So at this point, were you still job shopping as well? Or was there enough money in this phase one, phase two that this was all you were doing?
This was pretty much all we were doing. We had a couple of small manufacturing projects going on the side, but most of it was just the funding from the SBIRs. It was what was keeping us afloat. And, we had really low overhead. I think maintaining that, some of that has been luck but I think listening to your story of kind of maintaining your day job through those first couple of years is really critical. And while we weren't, I didn't have a day job outside of this, I was blessed through luck with, low cost rent, good facilities and good people.
That's excellent. Yeah, I imagine that being able to focus on something like that really helped you kind of narrow your company's focus, like really know what your niche is and kind of follow through with that and tailor your business to it.
Yeah, there were multiple SBIRs at the beginning that we were pursuing, and some were more on the mechanical side and some were more software oriented. And, it was an early decision that I'm very thankful that we made, which was deciding what kind of company we wanted to be and leaning into that.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important with any business is learning that that's something you need to do and then really focusing on it. So
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
where did you go from this Haas? Like what was your next purchase and why did you make it?
Yeah, so I realized in probably September or October of 2019 that we needed a 5-axis machine, that the parts that we were designing we weren't going to be able to complete on a 3-axis. And I had gone to IMTS in 2018, and the only company that would talk to me was Kuma. Obviously Haas was open, but I knew that we needed something a little bit more accurate than the UMC line offered. And everyone else, they talked to us, but they weren't showing any interest. And Akuma also has its North American headquarters here in Charlotte. And so it was kind of an obvious choice. And so we brought on the first 5-axis machine in October of 2019, and that was a Akuma M460V 5AX.
And how did you like that machine? Because we've talked a little bit about that through DM and some of the clearance issues that machine presents.
Yeah, the extent of my 5-axis knowledge was that I knew clearance was an issue. And in looking at machines like the DMU50 was the other machine we were looking at, I thought, man, this thing has a huge table. Our parts are, under 50 millimeters cubed. It's going to be really hard to get there. And kind of ironically, I ended up picking a machine that has some really challenging clearance issues because as the 460 gets towards the bottom of its Z stroke, the linear rails are hanging behind the spindle. And you end up needing to be kind of 7 or 8 inches off the table before you can get to center line with a 3.5, 4 inch long tool. So that was a bit of a learning curve. And I realized this kind of after we had bought it and went into a lot of shrink fit, longer 6-inch gauge line tools. But, Cat 40, even Big Plus really struggles past 4 or 5 inches of stick out. And so very accurate machine, wonderful control, but certainly it took a lot of fixture work to figure out how to get the tool to the part.
Totally, yeah. Because it's the linear rails, and then there's also that giant box hanging off the trunnion. Every time I've seen that in videos, I'm like, oof, that just scares me. Like the clearance is A90, or just seems insane.
Yeah, and at the time, I didn't get Camplete until we bought that machine. And in hindsight, I should have gotten Camplete earlier. I think Fusion now having some machine simulation ability really changes things for folks. But, had I been able to see that simulation earlier, I would have been able to steer us around that problem. But it certainly wasn't self-evident in looking at, I'm sure you've looked at the machine documentation that you get, and the prints are a little bit hard to interpret sometimes.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, this actually might be a good place to do a little tangent. Riley Gilman asked, what software do you use? So have you changed what cam you're using? I assume you're still on SolidWorks. What's the suite that you guys use?
Yeah, so it's a mix between Mastercam and Fusion. I cut my teeth on Fusion, but as soon as we got into ITAR work, had to make the transition. Mastercam was really similar to our first machine purchase, right? It was because there was so much documentation behind it in terms of YouTube videos and just a much larger user base. So certainly not something that, we get really good capability out of Mastercam. I might have made a different decision had I gotten to start over again. But beyond that, we've always had CAMplete between our CAD CAM and our machine. So everything in 5-axis, we post-process through CAMplete.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, it seems like it's a kind of a deal when you consider just the cost of post processors for most CAM systems. I mean, the fact that you get a dialed post alongside with machine sim, it seems like a kind of a no brainer, even with its pitfalls in setup.
Yeah, I think the other thing, and this is a recurring theme in this whole industry, is that it really comes down to people. And, the folks at CAMplete are really wonderful between Ivan and Danish in being able to support us in getting our posts to do exactly what we want. And, at the time, I think CAMplete was $12,000 or $15,000. And so the fact that you can get it now for, a subscription through Autodesk, I think it's a no-brainer for anybody getting into 5-axis for the first time.
Totally. So back to the story, you had this 460V 5-axis. What was the trajectory from there? Were you hiring more people, acquiring more machinery? What did your needs end up being?
Yeah, so we brought on our first 5-axis machinist later into 2020 at the start of the year. And, that was a really tremendous opportunity for me to kind of side seat with a guy who had been doing this for 20 years. And, really open my eyes to what's possible in terms of 5-axis and open my eyes in terms of what's possible when it comes to work holding and fixturing. And so we brought him on, and then later that year we were awarded the phase 2, and we brought on 3 full-time mechanical engineers. So, the early years of the business, we were very heavy on the engineering side and very light on the manufacturing side. Most of my time was spent programming and running machines, honestly, until maybe just a year ago.
That's amazing. I mean, I feel like that is the opposite story for most people. Most people, their first hires are to get them out of the machines. And it seems like your hires were engineers and compliance, which is very interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has made us successful is that we have a really good fusion between our engineers and manufacturing folks. And so, in those early years, I was dabbling in both. So I knew exactly what was going on the design side, and I was the one actually having to make the parts. And it really closed the loop on the DFM problem that I'm sure everyone who has run other people's parts has suffered from.
Indeed.
Yeah. And so being able to be involved in the design process and teach our engineers about how I was selecting tooling, why I needed faces in certain places to establish datums, et cetera, was just invaluable. So from the beginning, we were making parts that were designed for manufacture, and that was just invaluable.
So let's talk a little bit about hiring before we continue. What have you learned in hiring? Because that's something that Brad and I are looking at now. I think that we're both a little hesitant to hire. We've both worked with a lot of machinists in town, and a lot of them we can't trust our machines to. So like, what things have you learned about asking the right questions or bringing people on that you can trust with your machinery and with your business in general?
Yeah, I think you struck on the exact same concern that I had when I was onboarding, which is how do I hand off this, $250,000, $300,000 machine to somebody that I don't know? And, am I prepared to suffer the consequences when things go wrong? And so, for me at the beginning, we're very thorough in our interviewing process, in terms of calling references and actually having our manufacturing folks process parts for us. So I'll give them parts that I've machined in the past where I know the correct methods, I know the pitfalls, I know the challenging features, and I'll listen to how they process that part. So that's been really helpful. It also, I think, just comes down to intuition. I think it's something that you, at some point, just have to take the leap. We tell our people here that we have kind of a zero tolerance for crashing. So, none of our machines have even been bumped outside of me rubbing a collet check on the lathe, which we don't need to talk about. But beyond that, our machines have never even, a holder has never even made contact with material. And I think that isn't entirely luck. I think it's starting at the hiring process by saying, I'm only going to bring in intelligent, hardworking, diligent people. So they have to meet this minimum threshold. You then have to pay them enough that they care and that they're invested, and that they're not at work worrying about how they're going to pay their bills or if they have enough money to get new tires for their car or anything like that. And then you have to set the standard and kind of step back. It really comes down to process after that. You have a robust enough system that it can tolerate the kind of human mistakes that are inevitable. And, I think a lot of it comes down to mistakes, crashes are never the result of a single failure, right? There's half a dozen things that had to go wrong for that crash to happen. And so even if you write an offset incorrectly, if you're running the machine in single block, if you're coming down at 2%, you're probably not going to hit, right? And so you had to fail at a whole number of things in order for that bad event to happen. And so I think it comes down to people, but then a lot of process behind them. And so as kind of the financial of having the financial responsibility of the machines crashing, I had developed really robust processes to not bump our machines. And so I had a system to put our people into. And I think that's really what made the difference.
That's great. What can you share about preventing crashes then that, listeners could learn from?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think it's making sure that the digital world and the physical world are aligned, right? So making sure that everything is in alignment between CAM and the control. So, making sure that our models are placed correctly, that our fixtures are placed correctly, our tools are modeled correctly. And then before running that program, auditing all of those things. So, I don't commit a lot to memory. We print out a lot of setup sheets. We print out a lot of Excel documents where we confirm the right tools are loaded, the right stick out is in the holder, the right holder is being used. And then it's leaning on software. So things like Camplete to be another layer of defense. All post processors are challenging at the beginning of, being suspicious that they're going to work properly. We've had in every machine that we've ever had, we've had issues at the beginning with the post processor. And so taking your time at the beginning, I think matters a lot until you develop trust in the post. And then I think really it comes down to a couple things. So we don't run machines tired here. If something feels wrong, we stop until we figure out what's wrong. And I can't tell you how many times it's been 3 p.m. I've got the program loaded, tools checked, everything's ready to go. And something just feels off. And I just go home and I come back the next day and inevitably I find something that was wrong. And then it comes down to, I think as a machinist, you develop scars from things going wrong and kind of, you say never again.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
So I check the torque on the vise right before I hit cycle start every single time, because that, the first time I threw a part because I forgot to tighten the vise was, left in my memory. And so, I think it's pulling time out of the equation is what it really comes down to.
I like that. So you also said two things. You said you have a no tolerance policy for crashes, but you also recognize that there's human error. So how do you strike that balance? Because the last thing you want to do is, come down on your machinist so hard that they hide mistakes from you. But you also don't want to be so lax that they're breaking tools left and right because, I'm trying to prove a process. So how did you strike that balance and accept, failure and mistakes, but also very much encourage them to not make them?
Yeah, it's a really fine balance, right? And so I have something I tell everybody when I onboard them, which is mistakes are inevitable. And I just ask you kind of do 3 things after that mistake has happened. The first is acknowledging the mistake and the role that you played in creating it. So, it's that first step of identifying how this happened, what went wrong in the process that got me here. The second thing is acknowledging the impact that failure had on the company and just everything in general. So whether that's schedule or, expense or whatever else. And then the third thing is just coming up with a way not to do it again. Let's change the process. It's just inevitable that people are going to drop tool holders, that they're going to break tools, things are going to rub. But as long as we're on a trajectory of constant improvement and you step back from people when they're trying to set up a part and run it for the first time, we really haven't had trouble.
That's great. I like that a lot. I think my first boss it was not as formalized and not as well spoken, but he did very similar things with me that are lasting impressions for sure. So
yeah, I mean,
go for it.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think often removing money from the equation is helpful. So letting our guys know that, some of that comes down to the budgeting of the business, is making sure that we have the resources available to support it when a tool breaks or something gets dropped. It's also investing in the best tooling that we possibly can. And whether that's the physical tools in the machine or the software, I think really reduces the risk as well.
Definitely. I wholeheartedly agree there. So you had hired on these mechanical engineers. Where did the company go from there?
Yeah, so for the last, since 2018, we've been working on a single internal product. So it's something that hopefully will be debuted in the next year or two. But we've really been working over these last 3 or 4 years in refining that product through kind of design iteration on the computer, but also manufacturing prototypes, testing them, putting them in the field. Our customers, we take very seriously our commitment to the warfighter and making sure that they have a product that is well engineered from the start, but also thoroughly and exhaustively tested before it ever goes out in the field. And so it's a very long design process here. We're working in complex assemblies that take a lot of time to sort out. And so, there's been a whole variety of projects over the years that we've worked on, but they're really, 70% of what we do here is product focused for internal designs that we have complete agency over. And the balance is, supporting other companies in their product design, and then a very small amount of kind of job shop contract manufacturing work.
That's awesome. So this is still the same product from the grant that you've been working on through now.
Correct. Yeah. So it's been a long road. We're very excited about the results, and it was that product that drove the initial purchase of the 460. It drove the purchase of the LB, the lathe. It eventually drove the MU, and the Kern and the Aroa were really purchased specifically for this part, and it's long-term full rate production.
How cool. That's I imagine it's very gratifying to be able to put that much time and effort into one product or family of products or whatever it is. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful experience to have a customer that is willing to share in our vision of quality and performance. So somebody who is really willing to invest the time and money to perfect something.
Totally. So, what about other software that you're using? I imagine you have some sort of PDM and some sort of ERP if you're running, especially government type projects.
Yeah, so we started building our own internal ERP software. So again, kind of that mentality of investing in smart people who are curious and well intentioned. Our compliance officer kind of absorbed and took on that responsibility, and kind of similar to my story, taught herself how to program and ended up writing the internal software that we use to manage the company.
No way. That's so cool. That's a rarity for sure.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So, some of it has been really nice to develop really tailored solutions to our problems. And then certainly, as we get bigger and the problems become more complex, we'll probably eventually onboard some kind of third-party ERP system to take over some of the more complex tasks. But it's certainly a really big part of our process here.
That's excellent. Well, let's get into questions from listeners. We've got a ton. Your friend and mine, Dustin, first asked, "You're a dear friend, but will you ever machine as well as you shoot?"
I appreciate that, Dustin. No, the origins of us getting into the defense world really started with me shooting competitively as a kid. And so that was another part of my life in the past. And that's where Dustin and I met. And it's kind of fun to see, I think that industry is so intertwined with manufacturing. And it's been really nice over the years to maintain those connections from that time in my life, and be able to see people start manifesting their own product designs and building their own companies and get into manufacturing.
Definitely, yeah. Servant Solutions asked, "Why did you choose the Micro HD over the Micro Vario?" And actually, let's expand that. Why Kern in general? What made you guys go down that route?
I think it started with the 460 in trying to pursue our customers' vision of quality and of performance. Our engineers drove us to really high dimensional standards, and we were struggling over long production runs with thermal issues. And I think for the traditional part, it really wouldn't even be something that you would notice. But when you're trying to hold micron level true positions, it starts to get a little challenging. And
Oh, wow.
so it started there. And we started looking, obviously we had the base model Akuma. And so we knew that their MU line, their full-fledged 5-axis machines offered a lot of, thermal management that our existing machine didn't have. And, we started looking at other machine tool manufacturers. We looked at Hermla and we looked at Kern. And, early in the business, we realized that, you know, meeting people face to face, whether it's our anodizer, our material vendor, whoever it is, meeting them face to face was invaluable. And, aside from being like a nerd in manufacturing, and I didn't need much of an excuse to take a trip over to Bavaria, we went to Eschenlohe to see Kern, and we went to Gosheim to see Hermla on the same trip. And I think it's really invaluable to be able to see the machines without their sheet metal on and see how they're constructed underneath and what the process is behind, what's the design theory and how are they assembled.
Definitely. Yeah. So then why HD over Vario? Is it just because of those very tight true positions?
That was certainly some of it. Kern has, I think, kind of unique claim on their ability to achieve, volumetric true position. And so that was certainly something that I knew I needed to commit energy towards. And, I think a lot of credit to the folks at Kern that, and Dan specifically, that said, hey, look, man, your parts are really going to be just fine on a Vario. But I think early on, maybe it was a sunk cost dilemma that it was like, if I'm going to pay this much anyways, I might as well get the best that I can.
Right.
So I don't know if going to Germany, I had already made the decision of HD over Vario. But certainly seeing the machines in person and seeing the way they're constructed, the HD was a refined product that I think had inherited a lot of, in being a product-based company, you can see the evolution of your own design. And I could see the evolution of the HD being an improvement over the Vario in terms of rigidity. And, the HD, whatever machine we chose to make this part and to put it into full rate production needed to be able to produce, tens of thousands of parts a month. And so, we're talking, we're moving 150 pounds of material a night. And so it was a lot of, we're very fortunate to have a family of parts that we knew ahead of time when purchasing a machine. And so, when we went to Kern, we asked them to do a demo because we're removing so much material. A lot of our parts start maybe at 1,000 grams of material, and the finished part is maybe 12 to 15 grams. And so,
wow,
it's just a huge amount of material removal to leave the lightest part possible. And so we asked them to do a demo showing the machine's ability to remove material. And honestly, the machine was removing material at a faster rate than our Cat 40 machines were. And, certainly you could push a Cat 40 machine harder than an HSK 40, but to have reliable process, we don't push our machines that hard. And so I kind of realized at that moment that HD is more than good enough in terms of rigidity to do what we need it to.
Awesome. Well, we've got a bunch more current questions. Steel Phil wanted to know about managing your ERC 80. Are you using the Aroa software, and what's the learning curve been like for autonomous running?
Yeah, so we're using Batch Process Manager, which is the Heidenhain native solution, and I don't really see a need to go to anything beyond that. I think if we've talked about putting a CMM on the other side of the Aroa to have it offload parts, which I think is a little bit of a romantic vision. And so, if we go to if we decide to integrate another machine that isn't a Kern on the other side of the Aroa, we might need to look at different software, but I think for 95% applications, Batch Process Manager is more than powerful enough.
Okay. And then, what's the learning curve been like? Have you been ensuring safer operation that doesn't help the machine, with like broken tool detection, probing, all of that stuff?
Yeah. So, the learning curve was really short. In part, I think anyone who's bought an Aroa in the last 2 years has known that their lead time hasn't been the best. And so our machine showed up 4 months before our Aroa did. And so we had programs ready, fully fleshed out by the time the Aroa got here. And so I think, within a day or two after Tina had left doing the install of the Aroa, we had it running overnight. And then in terms of safe running, I really think it comes down to, it's what we had talked about before, right? It's people and process. So obviously we're doing tool breakage detection. 100% of the time as tools leave the cutting area. We're not doing anything in terms of logic behind that to call redundant tooling or to call, the next pallet and start over with a sister tool. I think it's something that we'll probably explore in part. I live really close to the shop and we're just getting it off the ground. And so I'm not hyper focused or worried about absolute spindle uptime. I'm much more interested in refining the process to a point that it's reliable. And, we haven't had, we've been making this family of parts on the Akumas for years. And so we have a pretty robust understanding of the tool life that we get out of everything. And so, I think I don't believe we've had a single tool break in the Kern.
Wow.
So from
That's
that
killer.
standpoint, yeah, we're just not really suffering from that. We do a lot of stuff at the beginning. Some of it has been from learned mistakes. Some of it is seeing our friends on social media make mistakes and going, "Oop, never thought about that one. I need to develop a process around that." So, our stock is prepared in a way it can't be loaded incorrectly. We probe everything as it comes into the machine. Everything that goes in the machine is dovetailed. So we're not relying on stamped work holding or holding into a vise, just again, for process reliability. Everything is validated in CAMplete. Then we validate everything in DCM on the control. It's all run very carefully at the beginning, and it's using tool paths and tooling that we've used for years. And so I think maybe we have a little bit of we've had artificially good luck because we're kind of making parts we've made before. But I think beyond that, we're also just blessed with the fact that we have the time in our schedule to be able to commit as much energy as we do into process, as opposed to just needing to get the part running as soon as possible.
Yeah, that sounds almost luxurious coming from a prototype standpoint. That's amazing. So you mentioned, process including tool holding and work holding. What's your go-to for this stuff?
Yeah, so we use a lot of Helical Harvey, Micro 100 line. I think like everyone else, we've just found that their online catalog, for the lack of a better term, their GUI is better than anyone else's. And it's so good that our engineers use it. So, oftentimes features in the parts will actually be called out by their, helical EDP number. So we've gotten to a point now where our engineers are so involved in the DFM process that they're actually calling tools out to manufacturing. And so they've been really wonderful. I would say everything beyond them, when we can't get what we need out of Helical, we go to Frasia. Really Frasia obviously has this higher cost associated with it, but they have the most robust speeds and feeds of anyone that we work with. And so we know that when we get a tool from them, it's going to run. And so I think for us, Frasia has really been our get out of jail free card when the engineers are trying to push us to really challenging, L to D ratios or anything else. And then for all of our drilling and reaming, everything has been MA Ford. They've been a really wonderful vendor for us, and their tools are really reliable. We use a lot of Nachi products for flat bottom drilling, and then we use a lot of OSG for our tapping, and then Scientific Cutting Tool for all of our thread milling.
Awesome. And then what about tool holders and vices or dovetail vices or whatever you're using?
Yeah, so tool holding is, I think like a lot of folks, we started with Mari Tool. We have hundreds of their holders here. I think they make a really high value product. We've had some issues on the support side with them, and so we've started to move away from them. We have a fair bit of YG1 and Technics products, but then, as of late, we've gone almost completely RigoFix. So we use a lot of RigoFix. Obviously, it's exclusively RigoFix on the Kern, but we're starting to migrate that onto the MU. And then on our lathe, it's almost exclusively Sandvik. I think a lot of that has just been, our engineers are producing really challenging parts. Our customer has really high standards. And so we try to match the challenge of what we're trying to do with the vendor that we're using to support it. So, so many things are solved by having the knowledge the tool has zero run out or near zero run out. It's so much is solved by knowing that it's not the end mill that's causing the problem, most likely.
Yep.
And so it's been, it's a huge upfront investment to get into these tooling systems, but I've found the ROI to be really, it's a worthwhile investment. And I can't tell you how much time I've spent dialing in tools in ER holders. And, it's always that time where you have to finish it that day and you're tapping the thing in and you break that 440 thread mill and you realize, maybe I didn't net out positive here. maybe I would have saved some money if I had just bought a tool holder that wouldn't have this issue. And, at the beginning, we tried to go down the shrink fit road. And I think we made this big mistake in buying a low cost shrink fit machine that couldn't heat up the holders fast enough. And so it was easy to get the tools in. It was really hard to get them out. And shrink fit is amazing if you have I think the right machine behind it, and we just didn't. So I think in hindsight, if we had started with Heimer as opposed to going to the Mari tool kind of economy machine, we probably would be more of a shrink fit shop. But again, we run a lot of tools under 1/4 inch, and I think shrink fit starts to struggle a little bit there. And I think if I could go back in time, we would have just jumped into the RigoFix boat earlier. The Power Grip is just a really tremendous product.
It's amazing. Yeah, we've started switching all of our standard tools over to it. I know a lot of people are like, why are you putting Power Grip in a Brother? And it's for the exact same reasons you said. Like I have zero worries about run out. I have zero worries about tool pull out. Like I just load it and I go. And it doesn't cross my mind anymore that that's the problem.
And I think there's this other big component of it. Like you can calculate the cost time of tearing down each holder, but you can't calculate the intellectual capacity that it takes, the amount of energy that's consumed by running a system that has run out. And whether you're having to dial that run out or you're worried about the tool's performance as a result of it. And so I think RigoFix, if you asked our guys, they would say, this has really freed us up to focus on what matters and not just be worried about the tools all the time.
Yeah, 100% really is. We posted on LinkedIn that we had switched to it, and I think it was Rob Lockwood or somebody, or maybe Jamie, that posted. They were like, yeah, it's worth every penny, but it's a lot of pennies. And yeah, it's very rare that something that expensive really is worth the money, or like all the money. And yeah, it's just amazing. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I don't think there's any free lunch. Looking back, I don't know if we would change anything because I don't think somebody starting out should buy RigoFix.
I couldn't afford it. Like no. There's no way. And we rolled in the starter pack to our most recent machine purchase. And even then, like buying more holders, it still hurts. Like, oh, okay, that's a few more $1,000. Like, yep. But, every time I load up a tool and not worry about it, I directly have seen tool life increases in stainless steels and things like that I have to attribute to Power Grip. But there's nothing else that has really changed.
How are you guys handling the cleaning process?
Oh, I just soak everything in alcohol. Like we have the little, taper wipe, but we have a spray bottle of alcohol right next to the unit, and I soak the collets and blow them out and wipe them out with Q-tips and just soak the holder and then use the taper cleaner. And yeah, I would much rather overdo it than underdo it.
Yeah, I think we have nearly identical processes. So I think that's the only thing, but I think that's just immutable. I don't think you're going to get away from that in any tooling system. I think shrink fit to an extent is a lot easier in that regard, but I think it's a worthy price to pay.
Yeah, well, and we've started just cleaning our ear collet holders even more now, because I think it's one of those things you don't really think about when you're starting out, is like, oh yeah, I'll wipe out a collet or I'll wipe out a collet nut, but now I really spend a little bit more time, and I have a ultrasonic system that I'm putting together for our collet systems, like not the Power Grip, but for ER, that's going to be a rinse in it's like an Elma ultrasonic fluid that's supposed to be completely neutral, so it shouldn't eat away at any of the collets, and then rinse in alcohol, and then it'll be a final dunk in M1 steroid oil. But just to make sure that from here on out, I just don't have to worry about dirt in any of my collets or grime or anything.
Yeah, you'll have to tell me how that works out. It's building those little closed cells where everything that you need is in one station, and you just get to offload the concern of that away, I think is invaluable. And then knowing the inverse, that you come up to that cell because you need to do something, and you're not worried that everything's going to be where it should be and that you have all the tools you need. You're not going to have to spend 15 minutes running around the shop trying to find the torque wrench.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the thing that's holding it up right now, is I'm trying to find 2 more bins for the alcohol and the M1 that are sealable but are easy to, fill and all of that stuff. And once I find those, I'm going to set it up and get it going.
Awesome.
LHM Engineering asked, how has the process been of bringing on the Kern and learning the Heidenhain control?
Yeah, it's I think it is predictably challenging. It's certainly, Hawes is a 1 day, 2 day, 3 day process. And I think if you come into it goes back to there is no free lunch, right? That with all of that performance comes challenge. And it's not outside of the scope of what I expected, but it's certainly not without challenges. If you're expecting a machine to have volumetric accuracy under a micron, it's going to take some work to get there. And
Totally.
yeah, so it's onboarding of MUs, the MU, I should say, I think taught us that lesson in seeing, all right, it's going to take 6 weeks to get this up and running. And I think set our expectations correctly. But, the results kind of speaks for itself. I don't think, I think the true test is, would you do it again? And the answer is a resounding yes. I
Okay.
don't think that there's a machine that can match the performance of the HD for the parts that we're trying to produce on it.
Was
And
the MU significantly different enough from the 460 that it took that long?
what do you mean by that?
Well, like I would have imagined that onboarding the MU would have been very simple since you were already so used to 5-axis with a OSP control.
I think some of it isn't so much our process, it's just the logistics of getting a machine that complicated running. So it's, I think even Kern, I think, was optimistic. KPI was optimistic that, they'll arrive on a Monday and by Friday the machine will be running. And I think all of our guys kind of looked at each other and said, there's not a chance in hell. It takes a week of just plumbing, of just routing hoses around. And so, I had those expectations. The MU was also the first machine that we ever got laser shot on site. And, that was a week-long process, and that held true for the Kern as well. It's an involved process. Things go wrong. You run into little errors, things weren't shipped, whatever it might be. It's not totally turnkey. So the MU, from a process standpoint, as far as programs and all that, I mean, we knew how to run the control the day it got here, right? It was one and the same. It was more just infrastructure change and kind of shutdown of putting in a machine of that scale.
Gotcha. So how much are you involved in new machines like the Kern? Like, are you programming it too? Because I know a lot of people, when they hire machinists and support personnel, they're either trying to or just de facto being removed from that process. But it sounds like you're kind of still in it.
Yeah, I would say, up until, let's say, a year ago, I was programming 95% of our parts here across the 3-axis, 5-axis, and turning centers. And I had every intention when I bought the Kern that I was basically going to everybody was going to jump up one machine. And the Kern was kind of going to become my baby and where I would prototype, and that I was going to set up the production for this. And, I think some of it is that through Dan, we found an amazing machinist named Matthew, who we brought in from another shop. And I realized in the 6 months between when we hired him and when the Kern got here that he had a much higher aptitude for Heidenhain and for a lot of the simultaneous 5-axis work that we needed to do than I did. And he was the right mixture of kind of diligence, but also speed that we needed for that machine. And so a little bit bittersweet in really handing the machine off to him. So I've done some light programming, but I would say 95% of what's been done on the Kern has been Matthew. And, a real shout out to him in that respect of getting that running. But I think also a testament to the folks at Camplete, at Mastercam, at Barefoot, our distributor, of Chris and Tina, and the folks in Eshinola, of being able to provide us the resources we need to get the machine kind of singing the way it does. So I'm still, I still am programming day to day on the lathe in getting some of the more complex CAD/CAM stuff running. And I'm still involved every single day in troubleshooting problems that are happening and sitting down with our machinists and programmers. But I realized in order for the business to grow, I needed to get off the controls, which was a sad but necessary reality.
Totally. Yeah. LHM Engineering also asked, have you found any limitations of the HSK 40? He also was asking, why choose the Kern, but you've kind of gone over that. But yeah, why HSK 40? And you said that it's even roughing faster than your Cat 40s?
Yeah, so that's a little bit probably of a misnomer. It is The demo that we saw in Ashinola, the Kern was roughing at a faster rate than we would ever push our Cat 40s.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I don't know the rate to which, as a percentage basis, how close we are to the limit, but I do know that we're at a stable process. And so, perhaps in time as we grow, we'll start trying to push the machines incrementally harder, but we're running in a very stable zone. So I don't find the rigidity of the HSK platform of HSK 40E to be a major point of concern for us. What I think the Kern does so well is the kinematic design from the beginning was designed for having B at 90. And so from a clearance standpoint, the machine is unbelievable. And so being able to run, tools with 62 millimeter, 870 millimeters, 80 millimeter gauge line is, I think, defeats a lot of the challenges. So obviously Cat 40 is more rigid, but the machine is so well designed kinematically that we can run drastically shorter tooling. And I think we kind of net out in that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I never really thought about that, but that makes a big difference for sure.
It was a big change for us even in the MU, was that there was so much more clearance in the MU that, we're running 3.5, 4-inch gauge line tools. And I apologize to all the listeners who are having to listen to me convert between metric and standard constantly. But it's, I think any time you're exploring 5-axis, you need to really strongly be considering how compact you can get your tooling, because it really makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of like the graphics. It's one of those untalked about things for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
You had mentioned how important it is to meet face to face, and you just recently got to go to Japan. And Chief Bub was asking, what was the coolest part of Japan? Did you go see any Japanese garden or see any bonsai? So how was the trip?
Yeah, the trip was amazing. So, origins of the trip were kind of funny that twice a year we host a trivia game at work with all of our employees, and we give away all these prizes. And one of them was a trip anywhere that somebody wanted to go, as long as it was work related and, we could derive some benefit in terms of education. But I kind of pitched it as, hey, if you can find a conference that we want to go to in Hawaii, let's go do it. And it wasn't picked first. And so I was, I thought, well, man, maybe I'm just awful to travel with and I don't realize it. And our compliance officer was when it came to be her time to pick the prize, she picked the trip and said, I want to go to Japan. And everybody else who had picked previously kind of jumped up and said that was an option. And I said,
no.
I said, well, yeah. Well, we want to switch. I said, well, I can't, she was so excited. We couldn't take it away from her. So I then called our sales rep at Morris South, who's the kind of the US distributor for Akuma, and said, hey, can I come get a factory tour? It's something that I had always wanted to do. And now this was the justification to do it. And it was kind of like a 6-month process from there of, I had no intention of them paying our way or anything. I just wanted to, see if they'd lend me an afternoon to see their facility. And it turns out that Akuma America hosts something called America's Days, which is an opportunity for the whole North and South American market to come to Japan and see Akuma's facility. So I think we were just the squeaky wheel that got the oil. I think we were probably the smallest customer there, but we were just the most passionate, excited about going. And so they were able to get us tickets. Unfortunately, due to some logistical issues with COVID and the like, Akuma only had the ability to bring one of us over. So we'll be, I think, going back again with our compliance officer to see Akuma again and travel a little bit more of the country. But yeah, it was a tremendous opportunity. It was a very kind of, well scheduled and organized event. So they were able to coordinate all of our travel and, take us through 2 days of seminars and factory tours, and then take us through and kind of give us a 30,000 foot tour of Japan over the next 2 days. And, I was really happy. Our salesman reached out to us and said, hey, if we're all the way over here, would you like to stay a couple extra days and, get to see a little bit more of the country? So we had that opportunity. Unfortunately, to Alex's question, we went to a couple temples and got to see some gardens, but nothing, I think, at the level that he's referring to. And I think I just left that trip with a lot of lessons learned at Akuma, but also this kind of deep desire to go back to the country and explore some more.
That's great. Yeah, Japan is amazing. Brad and I went there,
really
5 years ago, I want to say. as kind of a business slash fun trip, and absolutely just loved it. What part of the country were you in?
Yeah, so
I'm
we
not sure where
flew.
Akuma is.
Yeah, so they're in a city called Nagoya.
Yeah, that's where I flew into actually.
Oh, no kidding. What were you doing in Japan?
We went to DMG, Mori, and we
Yeah.
also went to the Midatoyo Museum and saw one of their places there.
Yeah, it's a really weird experience, kind of the culture shock of arriving in Japan and then you're driving down the highway in Nagoya and you're like, man, I recognize half these company names. You're driving by Mazak and all these other companies. You go, man, this is really, you start to understand why all these machine tool makers are there.
Oh yeah. Well, I think when we flew in, I want to say all of the luggage carts were Fanuc branded. And it was just like, all these little things that you're like, oh, that's really funny. I would never see this in the US.
Yeah, no, I think that was, it was kind of twofold. I really enjoy factory tours, both as an opportunity to learn about the machine tool manufacturer and, ask some technical questions, but also just the traveling aspect of getting to see other parts of the world, I think is a real hidden benefit of this job.
Totally. Yeah. Alex also asked, how big do you plan to grow your business, and what are the 2 or 3 top obstacles you can currently see in your way?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to what we've been talking a lot about, which is kind of people, process, and I guess I should come up with something else that starts with a P, but probably cash flow and accounting would be the other side of it. So, I think we've done a really amazing job at building a culture here where everyone not only gets along, but they have the kind of resources and tools they need to do their job at a high level. But certainly as I look into the future at what, the opportunities are, we're turning away more work right now than we're taking on. And so it's a really wonderful problem to have, but it also opens up all these questions about growth and the direction we want to go. And I think all of that starts with people and figuring out how we're going to scale in a fashion where we preserve happiness while also kind of abiding by our quality standards. So, one of my early business mentors when I first started the shop and I, framed out that little office up in that print shop, the owner of that business had a really large company with, over 100 employees. And over the years, as his business matured, he ended up firing a lot of his problematic customers and the guys that gave him heartache. And his philosophy was that, my job here is to make money and have fun. And these customers or folks that are working for me are getting in the way of that. And so he let a lot of those people go, both customers and employees, and found that he was making more money and deriving more happiness and that his guys were happier and the whole situation was better. And that's certainly a lesson that I don't want to lose in our growth is how we grow in a fashion that we, everyone wakes up in the morning and is excited to come into work and that they have the tools that they need and that we have the work for them to do. And so I think that's one part of it. And then the other side is I realize that in that growth, we're going to need more robust process because the growth is only successful if we can maintain the quality standards that are currently bringing our customers to us. And, that starts with good people, but it's only realized through process. So, developing more robust ERP systems and more robust onboarding systems and HR systems and all the things that make a business tick and make it seamless are certainly at the forefront of my mind. And, we have, again, in that idea of visiting vendors and getting to see people face to face, I'm afforded this wonderful opportunity of getting to talk to other business owners that are in almost every instance running much larger and more successful businesses than ours, and getting to ask them, what they struggle with and are challenged with on a day-to-day basis. And it always revolves around people. And, I think universally, we're 13 folks. That's still a level where I know everybody and am involved in, most of the day-to-day decisions. But when you get to 25 or 30 or 50 or 200, that goes away. And so developing those middle managers and the folks that can communicate the customer's vision to the guys and validating that they're producing an outcome that will meet that standard is really kind of what keeps me up at night. And so that's our growth area. And then, as kind of as a lower tier concern is just always just day-to-day operations of maintaining positive cash flow and making sure that we're making good capital investments into new machines, into new people, into new infrastructure, uh, so that we can support, where our customer is going to be a couple of years from now and where we're going to be, not just what the problems are today.
Okay, yeah. So one of his other questions was, do you buy into all the automation hype? How do you see automation growing with your company as you add more people? I mean, obviously it allows you to do more with less, but where do you see that in your plan?
I think it relates to what we just talked about, which is with good people, with smart, motivated guys, you're able to reap the benefits of automation, because automation relies on really robust, diligent operator attached to it. And I don't necessarily mean operator in the sense of the way our industry uses it. The human robot link needs to be really robust. And so to some extent, I am maybe envious or curious as to how these really large businesses are able to take skill level one guys and put them in these really complex automation cells and get them to work. I think that's a little bit opaque to me. And I think that's why we started with the Aroa, was that the Aroa is kind of like the simple man's automation, right? You pay your way out of the problem, because instead of robotically loading material and device, you're just loading vices. So it's the vastly more expensive way to solve this problem, but it's the easier, I think, to implement. And I think, going back to Japan, Akuma was gracious enough to let us into their Connie Dream site. And they have, if my memory serves me, 6 of their largest double column machines. So these are machines where the X and Y travels are measured in, the X travels are measured in double digit meter values. And that whole facility is manufacturing their castings. And, your building is probably 300,000 square feet, and they had less than 10 guys working inside of it. And there were no managers walking around hassling folks. Everyone knew what to do. It was quiet and stable. And so I think that is inspirational, but I think it's also the product of a company that's been around for 125 years. And,
Right. Yeah.
It's one of our peers who was there from one of the other companies asked, how do you manage tool breakage detection? How do you, what is that? How are you guys solving that problem here? And I think the Japanese were a little confused by the question. And we thought initially it was a translating issue, but we learned that their process is so robust, they don't worry about that like we do.
What's a broken tool? What are you talking about?
Yeah. And you realize it's like, man, if I had been making virtually, some version of the same product, if I've been machining and cast iron for the last 100 years, I would probably have a similar answer.
Right. I mean, even in the last 10 years, like if you had been doing the same part since you started your company, like you'd be pretty dialed at this point.
Yeah. And so, they're doing all the stuff that we're doing, right? They're doing automatic tool breakage detection. They're doing all sorts of clever mid-process inspection and logic with sister tooling and all of that. But more so, they have really robust process. So do I believe in the hype of automation? Absolutely. Do I think it's a get out of jail free card? No. I think it is absolutely. And it's why these trips, we kind of joke from the outside that these trips are like, let's go to a conference in Hawaii, right? But it's not that. It's, if you are not innovating, if you're not staying at the cusp all the time, then you're going to get left behind at some point. And, back to the question that was asked earlier about why did we pick the HD over the Vario, it was about differentiation. It was about that the HD could offer us something to our customers that no one else had in our area. And that was more important to me. And that was going to keep us, at a level above our competition for years to come. And I think automation is the same thing. It's why we saw so much more of it in 2022 at IMTS than we did in 2018. And I think it is probably akin to the paradigm shift that happened in the 80s or 90s when we were going from, what percentage of shops were manual machine shops in the 80s and what percentage were running NC or CNC equipment. And I think that question will probably be asked again in 10 years from now, as to the shops that succeed are the ones that are able to use automation effectively. And the question right now is just like, when do you jump in, and to what extent do you want to jump in? I think things are vastly more accessible than they ever have been, but it's just hard. And you also have to have the product family or parts that can justify the rate of production. That has been, I think I've heard Mickey talk about this, and Alex, it's kind of shocking how fast you can make parts. And, coming in, there was one of the parts that we're running on the Kern right now. We were getting, let's say, 7 to 9 a day out of our MU. And in a 24-hour period, so if you just came in at 6 a.m. and came in at 6 a.m. the next day, we're making 47 of them on the Kern.
Wow.
Difference isn't just, a lot of it, right, is 42,000 RPM. Some of it is shorter kinematic loop, right? So we're just not traveling as much distance. Most of it is that the machine is running at night, and that our guys are free to focus on other things. And so they're spending more time watching the program. They're developing improvements. I'm sure we could get, if we put a HSK 63 20K spindle in the Akuma, it would probably start to balance out. But the real differentiator is just the fact that the machine is running from 5 p.m. until 6 a.m.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So is there any plans on bringing automation to machinery you currently have?
Yeah, it's a mistake I won't make again, which is purchasing. We've made some mistakes in automation. The first of which was that we didn't buy our MU with through air or through hydraulic on the table.
And I'm guessing that that's either impossible to retrofit or incredibly expensive.
Yeah, it's just not a feasible solution. And so that really limits us. The cost to automate that machine would be tremendous. And so it's kind of relegated as probably a little too harsh, but it's going to find its home in different work than maybe what it could have done. And then we tried, I've heard a lot about that bar feeders are the cheapest form of automation that you can buy. And so I leaned really heavily in that when we purchased our LB, with this thought that we're going to commit the space to the bar feeder, but we're also going to commit, it was something like a $13,000, $14,000 option to add automatic probing into the LB. And neither of those have netted more parts for us, because our parts are too high tolerance and they're made out of too exotic of alloys to allow an operator not to be present. And whether that's chip wrappings, whether it's chip management, or it's just the fact that, machining 17.4 and titanium and some other alloys are really challenging. And insert life is a thing, and the machine just can't be left for that long. And so I've grown, I suppose, more informed, but also a little bit more skeptical of some automation in its ability to just do what the Kern is able to do for us right now with the ERC80, which is leave at 5 and come in at 6 to a whole bunch of finished parts.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. I mean, the more people I talk to, there's so many little things that you don't realize can really, really hurt you with automation.
Yeah. And it's, boy, can you make bad parts fast. I mean, that's the other side of it. And, the Kern in a lot of ways is kind of buying you out of those problems, right? That you have this really thermally stable machine that's just wildly accurate. And you put really expensive tooling in it, and you solve, I think, a lot of the problems that people probably deal with. And you pair that with an ERC80, and you're left with only a handful of things that can go wrong. But, certainly when we were making the decision between the Hermla, Akuma, and Kern, Hermla's native robot loading of material was something that was interesting, but I think a little intimidating, because I just saw more ways that it could go wrong. And, at some point we're going to need to make that jump, because it just isn't affordable to have, $1,000 or $2,000 worth of vice for every part.
Right.
But certainly something that's on my list to learn more about over these coming years is how shops are solving those problems.
Oh, speaking of vices, I don't think we ever talked about which ones you guys are using.
Yeah, so we use, again, we've kind of learned our lesson in this. We use a lot of fifth axis for our little dovetails, so like the D115s and the D22s. I wish there were more options in the market, but they are a pretty robust product and they stand behind what they make. And then we've gone pretty much entirely Aroa on all of our vices. because they're more reliable than what we found from some of the other vendors. And again, some of their integrated solutions, like we use a lot of their ITS-72 integrated vices. So it's not a 2-part assembly. It's one piece, has been really successful for us. And then everything after that is all kind of custom fixturing that we make in-house.
Very cool. Well, that brings me on to shop news and new things. And actually, Alex's last question was, what will your next machine purchase be? So is there any, future plans on a new machine? Anything else new in the shop that you're excited about? What's going on?
Yeah, so I think all of our salesmen should just, mute this conversation so they don't hear this. But no, we need to increase our capacity for small part turning. So we're looking at a whole bunch of different solutions there, from Swiss machines to more traditional lathes. It's a bottleneck that we have. So that's certainly on our docket. We bought our first CMM. So up until now, everything has been hard gauging and in-process probing. And then, obviously optical comparators, but all kind of old school inspection. So we bought a Zeiss Duramax, in part because for most of our parts, it's accurate enough. And the shop floor stable nature of it and its form factor is, I think, kind of unmatched. I would have loved to have gotten a Contura, or, I think eventually we'll end up with a Micura, but, you really need, from what I understand, a pretty thermally stable environment that's very clean for those machines to net out the benefit of them. And
definitely, yeah.
We're just, whenever we decide to build a building or grow the business into a larger facility, will probably be when we start looking at larger inspection equipment.
Yeah, we're actively looking at a Duramax or possibly a Tigo or one of the Hexagon shop floors. Very up in the air. I don't really like PCDMS, and I think I've made it pretty clear on the podcast, but I love my Hexagon salesman. And really what it's going to come down to is we're just going to pit Hexagon versus Zeiss and have Brad, who has no CMM experience, see what he likes and doesn't like about each software. Because I can learn anything at this point. And if he feels like he's going to be more confident with PCDMS, then we'll go with something with that.
Yeah, I should have mentioned we have a Hexagon Roamer 8727 arm. So it's like a 2-ish meter, mobile CMM with the RS6 scanner on it. And I very much relate to the challenge of PCDMS. The arms are a little bit more challenging because there's just a couple more degrees of freedom and more human input. Powerful tool that we use on like a case-by-case basis as it's sometimes the arms are the only thing that gets you out of jail. But I think it was a pretty clear choice for us between Zeiss and Hexagon on the software side. Calypso is just, I think, a lot more intuitive to use.
That's what everyone is saying, and I have no experience with it, but I'm looking forward to trying it out because, yeah, I spent, 4 years programming, scanning CMMs with PCDMS, and
oh, wow.
I learned more from the forum than I did the classes that I took from Hexagon. And, there was a common fault with PCDMS where all of a sudden your manual and automatic alignment just wouldn't work together. Like they I don't know, like they violated clearly what was in the code. And the only workaround I found on the forum, and it was just copy out your entire program besides the alignments, start a whole new file, redo your alignments, and then copy the program back in. And I was like, this is, if the right answer is copy paste, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
It's always funny when you end up in software and you realize, we were trying to do some multi-start thread milling in Mastercam the other day and realized that they just didn't have that as a capability. And, sometimes you just get into these most basic problems and you go, am I really the first person to think that this should have this option?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, it just feels like a house of technical debt, like a house of cards of technical debt that's just been built on and built on. And it's like, come on, guys, like just this whole thing needs to be redone from the ground up as far as I'm concerned.
Have you used PCDMS since they developed the new GUI? Because I know, at least to my understanding in the past, it was all kind of pretty rigid hand programming. And now there's a much better HMI behind it.
I think the last version I used was either 2020. I think 2020 was the last one, like R2. So I don't know if it was in there or not.
Yeah, certainly talking to some of the older guys, it seems like it was much worse and has gotten better. But I still just, the icons are even still quite hard to navigate.
Yeah, yeah, it's just I don't know. We'll see. Like maybe I'll try Zeiss and be like, oh well, they both have issues, but we'll find out. So you just got the CMM. Any other CNCs on the near future, or kind of tapped out getting the Kern on?
Yeah, so we just placed the PO for the Duramax, so probably won't see it for 3 to 5 weeks, and then I suspect, and everything, it'll probably be 10 or 12 before we have it up and running. But really excited to have that as a diagnostic tool for us, and we're spending a lot of money on hard gauging right now, and I'm looking forward to being able to offset a lot of that into a CNC solution. But beyond that, this year is really focusing on people and trying to limit as much as we can CapEx and trying to kind of give ourselves a little bit of breathing room to be able to pivot when the right opportunity presents itself. So we've been on kind of this really aggressive trajectory and trying to slow that down a little bit to make sure that we grow in a stable way is really the focus of this year for me. So probably not a lot of machine tool investment. I say that now and the right job comes and that can all change. I think that's been a real blessing as the business has grown, is being able to only take on the work that makes sense for us and not take on things that are either outside of our skill level or aren't as profitable. And so being able to, whether it be firing or just not taking on work from customers, has been kind of invaluable. And so I'm excited to see what the future year holds in terms of the work that comes in and how we might pivot the business. But as of right now, we don't have any big plans other than just kind of getting this current product into full rate production and seeing where that takes us.
Yeah, that sounds super exciting. Well, that brings me to the last two questions I ask every guest every week. The first of which is, what did you research this week? Doesn't need to be machining related. It's just what's been popping up in your browser. It's always interesting to see what interesting people are into.
That's a good question. We've been looking a lot at machine-induced residual stress as well as internal residual stress. So trying to identify a material that isn't cast iron that, when machined, has limited warpage, for the lack of a better term, but still gives us surface hardness and durability greater than aluminum. So if anybody listening has some great recommendation, I'm all ears. Really we have a product that we're trying to develop that requires quite high flatness tolerances after machining and needs to be machined from something quite durable, and are kind of butting our heads up against some issues with warpage that we're seeing. And so, yeah, that's really been the focus of this last week, and certainly a growing respect for the Mars of the world, who write all these wonderful papers and give us all of this data. But certainly humbled by the complexity of that issue.
Definitely. Yeah. Material science is one of those things I wish I had more of a background in, because like when I took material sciences classes at the time, I was like, I don't know why I need to know any of this. I don't care. And now it's like, oh man, I wish I had paid attention more and I wish I had gone deeper on that.
Yeah. And certainly, when I was at Eschenloa just a couple weeks or months ago and had an opportunity to spend the day with Marv, and getting to see someone like him with his brain work is a fascinating thing. And, they have a new aerostatic 80K spindle that he was trying out for the first time. And we're having some harmonic issues, just some chatter. And he went on his computer and changed the spindle RPM to a prime number. And he did it as if this was so self-evident. And I kind of had to okay, let's put the brakes on. What did you just do? And he explained it to me kind of like the Japanese would respond in not understanding tool breakage. And I said, Marv, I'm toning this down to my level here. And, the outcome was that somebody with his background in education and understanding of math, changing the spindle RPM to a prime number was a self-evident decision to make to reduce harmonics. And so I think the lesson from that was that I am perpetually humbled in this industry by the scale of knowledge that is out there, and living in the bottom of that Dunning-Kruger curve, that I'm just always learning just enough to know how much I don't know.
I think we can all empathize and sympathize there. Yeah, I very much feel that so often.
So what is similarly, what is on your list? What are you searching these days?
Oh boy. I'm still looking into 5-axis stuff. Everyone listening to this podcast will know that I am still constantly on the search for a new building for us, and that has just been string of disappointments left and right, which is no fun. And then we recently, I think I said it an episode or two ago, we bought a camera. And so I've been just diving into learning how to edit and DaVinci Resolve and all of that, which has been just such a deep rabbit hole. And I don't know that I'm ever going to get good enough to feel super confident in it, but I want to get confident enough that I can at least sub that workout as we kind of make more content for Protium.
How do
Kind of like,
you?
I'll go for it.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, kind of like how you didn't know what you didn't know when you first started subbing out parts to shops. That's how I would feel subbing out editing to anybody right now. Is like I don't even know what the words to ask for if I had critiques are. So I want to learn enough about the software and enough about the process that I can be intelligent if we start subbing that stuff out.
Yeah, I think that's such a hard curve to get over in any of this. Is just I don't know what I don't know. And I think that's where, this podcast, whole Insta Machinist community is so wonderful, because there's just been this incredible democratization of information that, I can just hop onto YouTube and learn so much about something that maybe 5 or 10 years ago would have been relegated to, the big aerospace companies, and to finding the right mentor.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and it's the unknown unknowns that really hurt you. Like there are many things that I know I don't know, but I know where I can look for those things. But it's the ones that I have no idea I should even be paying attention to. That's what really bites you in the ass in the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you pursuing in terms of 5-axis? What are your thoughts and concerns, and what are the drivers for you into one machine over another?
Right now, we're pretty sure it's going to be a C250 from Hermla. We went to Germany, a month and a half ago for their open house, and kind of saw the whole factory and all of that. And as far, it seems to me like service is really the biggest issue with any 5-axis. And they actually are just opening up a service center in Phoenix shortly. And they kind of have a sterling reputation in that area. And, with prototypes, going into 5-axis and then also getting a machine that's automation prepped and can take one of their automation cells in the future, I think is just a necessity for us growing our business, especially like we were talking before the show, finding someone that I can hire. I want those kind of processes to already be in place, or at least starting to be implemented when we hire somebody.
Yeah, I think Hermla, it's kind of twofold, right? You get into an ecosystem, and I think getting into Heidenhain is not a bad place to be. And then you struck on the exact reason that we kind of went with Akuma here in North Carolina, was that, more south, the distributorship and the service behind it almost matters more than anything else. Of just having people that will stand behind the machine when things inevitably go wrong.
Yeah, because once we start going down the 5-axis route, more and more parts are going to be pushed off onto it. So a machine down will mean so much more, significantly more to our business than, one of our brothers going down. And so we need something that we know can be fixed ASAP, and like that is a priority for the company we're buying from.
Have you thought about how you might change the process around your company in terms of programming or work holding or any of that when you start thinking about onboarding a 5-axis?
I think we'll probably stick with Fusion for now, because like you said, the tools are getting so much better within it. But I am already starting to dedicate quite a bit of time to developing workflows and templates and all of that on our 3-axis workflow, so that when we do get to 5-axis, that is kind of the commonplace. It's like, all right, we have a template file that we bring parts into. It's got our work holding. It's got all the probing and most of our tool paths already set up. And then we can kind of post and go from there. Very likely get Camplete as well, just to kind of mitigate that whole finding a post processor thing. I think the performance line from Heidenhain, I believe Camplete already has some pretty dialed posts for both the C250 and C400. So that should hopefully be, I mean, I'm sure it's not going to be plug and play, but about as close as you can get with a post for that.
Yeah, and presumably I'd be curious if Heidenhain has the same robust experience in terms of DCM that we have on the Kern on the Hermla. Because for us, that has been such a blessing that even with Camplete, especially at the beginning, there's this big question mark as to whether or not the post is right. And
Right.
DCM really gave us the confidence in that, as that, if you crash a machine, right, as we said earlier, there's 5 things that had to happen to get there. And DCM is a really powerful leg in preventing that. It's something that, like CAS on Akuma is really powerful, but a lot harder to set up. And I think Heidenhain has done a really fantastic job in making DCM be really accessible.
Yeah. Well, I know that the C250 would likely come with the TNC7, which is the newest control. And they had been showing off at the open house and before that, even how much easier it is on TNC7 to set up simulation. So it should hopefully be there and be relatively easy. I mean, it's going to be a hurdle no matter what, but at least something that we can account for it and, tackle once we get something like that.
And you guys are very much space limited, I presume, in your current.
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no way we can get one in our current. We have 1,000 square feet and 100 amps to 3-phase, and we are tapped out on power and tapped out on space. So yeah, it's right now it's just trying to find a space. For some reason, Tucson has not gotten the memo that commercial real estate is supposed to be softening right now. Is very much not like that in town. Everything that I've found is gone within 3 days or under contract. And every deal we've tried to strike, they would rather do the easy thing versus, splitting up a suite or big building or something. And so it's been tough. I think I'm on, I don't know, building 5 or 6 that I've tried to make offers on to put under contract, and they're already gone. So we'll get something. It'll just be much longer than we want.
Yeah, that's a challenging problem. And I think certainly something that's shared here, it's always the double-edged sword that you live in an economy or in an environment where things are growing and there's lots of opportunity, which means you have great people in town. But the other side of that is it's really hard to find space.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's my ever present thing. I'm constantly on all the websites to look for places. But yeah, that's basically what I've been researching this week.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a learning curve. I think I'd like to think romantically that we'll end up building a dedicated facility. I think these factory tours of places like Area 419 are inspiring in what's possible when you kind of build from the ground up. But certainly, if not, I have learned our lesson here in terms of power and concrete of just how much how much expense you can incur by coming into a building that isn't ready for industrial manufacturing. And, I never thought that running power to a machine could cost as much as a Civic or something.
Yeah, totally. Did you have to pour any slabs for like your MU?
Yeah, all of them. So we're pretty aggressive with that. So we've done it 3 times now, and it's a journey. We've gotten a lot better at it, but even still, that's a 5-figure problem usually, and or close to it. And, there's a lot more than just the purchase price of a machine to budget for. And I'm continuously humbled by the number of things that come up when it comes into installing a new machine. And power and concrete are always a big thing. And I think it's always a challenge, right? But you never want to be having an issue with the machine and wonder whether it's foundation related. And particularly, the MU is 42,000 pounds, and it's a big, long casting.
That's a monster.
Yeah, it's got 18 feet on it or something like that. So you can really twist and pull it with, it's anchored. And so it was something for me that the calibration of the machine itself, laser shooting the machine is something I'm absolutely going to do to every machine we get from this point on. But, it's probably a $10,000 problem. And it's not something where I want to question whether I need to redo it because the foundation's settled. And so I think it's kind of that belt and suspenders approach that, is an important thing to consider.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, the other question I ask every guest is, what are the things you're working on to be a better person, leader, employer, whatever? None of us are perfect. We're all working on stuff. What's yours?
Hmm. I think it's we have that's a challenging one. I think what I'm most focused on is becoming a better leader. Finding ways to communicate to our guys the standards and expectations in a way that nets happiness and profitability. Because that's really what it all comes down to: making money and having fun. And so, as I think I've said a couple times on this, people are the biggest challenge. And I think our guys would probably be surprised by the amount of time I spend worried about how they're doing and how things are going, whether or not I'm giving them the resources they need and all of that. So, very much focused on developing myself as a leader that can inspire people and, create the best outcomes possible.
Definitely. Yeah. I can only imagine. Like I said, that's hiring somebody is something that gives me a lot of anxiety right now because I know it's something I need to do, but I just don't feel ready for it, I think is the best way to put it. Like I know probably logically that that's really where we need to be, but yeah, just finding I've both Brad and I have worked with enough people in Tucson that I know, or at least I think I know, that the people I can afford I can't trust and the people I can trust I can't afford.
Yeah, no, that's certainly a challenge. And, you know, onboarding is, it's been a sliding scale that I think is fairly linear, that the amount of time that I have to commit towards communicating the vision and the intent and the standards shortens every time we onboard somebody. But it is, you very much feel at the beginning that this isn't saving time, that you're putting a tremendous amount of energy into just getting back to zero. But it's still, that doesn't mean it's not a worthwhile pursuit. And it is, certainly the biggest challenge. Learning to run all these machines, negotiate these contracts, write proposals, design parts, all pales in comparison to the challenge of hiring people and being an effective leader.
Totally. Yeah. Well, Keaton, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's humbling to be invited, and yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure. New Patreon thank yous. Thank you to Brad for joining the Patreon. You guys make this show possible. Let me send microphones and stuff to people like Keaton so you have good audio. Thank you all for listening, and I will be back next week.